It's been 9 months since the High Court scuttled the federal government's agreement to send 800 asylum seekers to Malaysia in exchange for accepting 4,000 verified refugees from that country. Since then, with the coalition refusing to allow changes to the Migration Act that would enable the plan, the government has maintained a policy of onshore detention, preferably community-based detention. Figures just released show almost 2,000 people have so far been released from detention centres into the community, into what's called community-based accommodation. The federal budget set aside over $1 billion to manage asylum seeker arrivals next financial year. That amounts to an estimate of about 450 irregular asylum seeker arrivals each month. That means arrivals by boat. But for the first time since the Tampa 11 years ago, the number of arrivals by boat this month has exceeded 1,000. Immigration Minister Chris Bowen is in our Parliament House studios. Minister, welcome to breakfast.
Good to be back, Fran. Good morning.
Minister, 1,000 asylum seekers arriving by boat this month. That's double what you and your department forecasts. This is outstripping your expectations and your policy capacity.
Well, it's not outstripping our policy capacity, Fran, but what it is an indication of what I said when the opposition said when they would oppose our legislation, that we would see more arrivals. Now, we have seen months with less than 450. March was a low month, and we have seen months with more than 450, and we adjust that as we go. But what we have is clearly a situation, and as you said, last time there was 1,000 a month. Well, then the opposition and government of the day passed legislation. Kim Beazley responded to John Howard's request and said, yes, I'll vote for that legislation. So we are asking no more of Tony Abbott than John Howard asked of Kim Beazley, and Kim Beazley agreed.
Well, Kim Beazley agreed. The opposition doesn't agree that your policy is a good policy. And just to stick with the implications of this, at least on the budget, I mean, in Senate estimates yesterday, the acting secretary of the Immigration Department, Martin Bowles, said the department's budget is based on estimates of around 450 asylum seekers arriving each month.
Arrivals is part of the equation, Fran. It's part of the many things which get
but clearly it's going to blow out on arrivals. That's my point.
Well,
because
Fran, a number of factors go to determining the irregular maritime arrivals budget. A number of factors. Arrival is one. The 450 figure is based on historical averages. Yes, unsurprisingly, we've seen a large increase in arrivals, as I said there would be, if this legislation did not pass the Parliament.
So these budget estimates are going to blow out.
Well, no,
they're estimated on 5,400 arrivals this year. We're already at 3,268.
Well, Fran, you're making an assertion. I'm running you through.
Isn't it fair enough?
No, I'm running you through how the figures are arrived at. I'm also running you through the fact that the arrival numbers is one of many equations, including how people are processed, where they're accommodated, etc., which goes into determining the budget.
Let's go to some of those areas now, because Senate estimates also heard yesterday there are 158 unaccompanied minors currently in detention centres. Why are they still there when your policy is that minors not be held in detention?
Well, let's go through it, Fran. We have 281 minors in detention as at Friday.
281.
281, you refer to the unaccompanied minors figure.
I'm talking
about. Yeah, no, that's okay. But in interest of full disclosure, I'm giving you the total number of minors in detention as at Friday. Now, we move children into the community. So every unaccompanied minor who arrived in Australia, who's eligible for release, who arrived before the 22nd of February this year, is in the community. Every accompanied child who arrived before the 11th of February is in the community. So what we do is we source the accommodation, we source the appropriate care arrangements, and we move people into the community. And when you have a big increase in arrivals, of course, that means that can take longer. But when you've got children arriving in February and being in the community by May, I think that paints a very different picture than, say, the Greens would like to paint, and a more accurate picture. You said that we've released 2,000 people into the community under this program. In fact, we've released 4,000 people into the community under this program. There's 1,966 people currently in the community under this program, of whom 635 are children. So 635 children in the community, 281 in detention, which is 71%. We said we wanted to get the majority of children into the community. We've done that. It's an ambitious program. I'm very pleased with the progress we've made. Of course, you'd always like to do it quicker, but as I've said to you before, Fran, you don't drop kids at Central Station and say, there you go, mate, you're on your way. You make sure you have the appropriate arrangements in place, is what we do.
Certainly, and I want to come back to that in a moment and find out a little more about how people are held in community detention and how that's proceeding. intriguing. But just with the statement that miners are moving out quickly, not all miners are moving out. We've heard that there is a problem with some of the ASIO security assessments. I think 6 miners at least still held in detention because of hold-ups with those ASIO assessments. The Greens want to change. They want to give asylum seekers the right to appeal against a negative ASIO finding. Should asylum seekers have that right?
Well, Fran, let's spend a couple of minutes on this because it is a very important area and it's complex. Now, firstly, these ASIO assessments are not made lightly. ASIO does not lightly issue an adverse security assessment. And I see lots of speculation around this saying, well, all you need to do is sympathise and then you get an adverse ASIO assessment. I've got to tell you, a lot of that commentary is misguided.
You've read these assessments and some of these people are bad people.
I've read the assessments, and these assessments are not made lightly, Fran. This is a process which ASIO takes very seriously, and when ASIO says to a government, and I would suggest any minister, any responsible minister, if ASIO says we believe this person represents a threat to Australia's national security, that minister would act accordingly. Now, in relation to appeal, we said last November that there was a case for examining this. The Attorney-General, Nicola Roxon, has the lead on that. She's working through it. It is a complex area. But it's not as simple as saying, well, just everybody should have the right to an automatic appeal. There are issues to be worked through as to how that would work in terms of how that would be held in camera, what protections there would be for ASIO sources, etc. So there's a lot of complexities, including legal complexities, that the Attorney-General is working through.
Not doubting the complexities, but and also not doubting your concern that, or your suggestion that a minister would not take an ASIO recommendation lightly, assessment lightly, but ASIO does not necessarily get everything right all the time, I guess. Sure. And time again we hear from asylum seekers who say they have no understanding of why they would receive a negative security assessment. Is it fair that they get some kind of log of claims so they can answer that?
Well, Fran, they're the issues that need to be worked through, and that's what the Attorney-General's doing. So we do say, look, there's three approaches on this. The Greens who just say automatically, this is easy, this should happen. The Liberals who say this should not happen. The Liberals are opposed to any appeal mechanisms for ASIO assessments. And there's us taking what I think is the sensible and considered way forward to say, yes, there is a case for examining this, but we need to get it right, and that's what we're doing.
Can I ask you about a specific case, not to do with asylum seekers, but a young boy called Ali Jasmine. He was jailed after being found to be not a minor, an adult that was using the wrist X-ray test that federal police use. He was charged with crewing an asylum seeker boat into Australian waters. He was sentenced to 5 years jail in a maximum security adult prison. We now know he was 13 when he was locked up. How can you guard against this happening again? What's a country like Australia doing jailing 13-year-olds?
Well, Fran, I think the Attorney-General's been very active here in dealing with this. Of course, these are matters for the courts. The Attorney-General's reviewed a number of cases. I should say very clearly, and I think, again, there's often misreporting and I'm not saying you're misreporting, but there is often in generally misreporting about wrist X-rays. My department does not use wrist X-rays and haven't for some years.
The federal police do, don't they?
Well, no, the federal police now refers us to do the age determination, and we don't use wrist X-rays and haven't for several years. Of course, it's always difficult to establish, and this is a big challenge, Fran. It's difficult for us to establish ages of not crew but asylum seekers. People often claim to be minors, and very often it's established they're not minors after an exhaustive process. So this is a complex area, but I think Nicola Roxon has dealt with it appropriately and reviewed several cases, and the appropriate action's been taken.
You're listening to RM Breakfast. Our guest this morning is the Immigration Minister, Chris Bowen. It's 8:15 on Breakfast. Minister, back to the issue of community detention. There's roughly 2,000 people currently held there. You say there's been 4,000. People are moving out at a quick rate. When people are in community detention, do they have complete freedom of movement? Can they work? What is the situation?
Well, Fran, there's two types of community release. So we've been talking about community detention so far. Now, this is what we use for families and children and some vulnerable adults who obviously are having some difficulties. So those people are accommodated by usually Red Cross. and we source the accommodation, and they get some support. Then in addition to that, we also have bridging visas, which are designed for adults who are more able to look after themselves. A bridging visa holder we do not provide the accommodation for, although they can of course go through the homestay program, which I'm happy to talk to you about. But they do have work rights, so they can go and work, and some have, and there's stories of some of them going up and looking for work in abattoirs, etc. But people in community detention don't have work rights, but they have more intensive support.
And in terms of the homestay program that was set up just within the last month, we've heard the first few asylum seekers have moved into homes. What's the level of interest, and how is this going to save the government money, some of that money that's being spent on the increased number of people arriving?
Well, Fran, this is an interesting thing, and again, I think, frankly, the opposition has said some pretty disgusting things about the homestay program, and they need to reflect on some of the things they've said. Homestay is a long existing program which provides for people with a spare room or with the will to do it, to provide accommodation to international students. Now, Homestay approached the government and said, look, you're releasing people on bridging visas, which means they have to find their own accommodation. Can we supply some of that accommodation? And we said, of course, that's a sensible thing to do for you to be able to be put in touch with people who are looking for somewhere to stay. So we put the appropriate measures in place. There has been a lot of interest. I think it's a couple of thousand expressions of interest. This is just like the bridging visa program. So a person on a bridging visa has to go and find their own accommodation. They'll find it in a variety of ways. Some will go and live together in a house. Some will go and rent a flat. Others will go through the homestay program. And so I think it's a perfectly appropriate thing to do.
So all these different versions of people, asylum seekers who arrive here by boat, now living in the community, is that the way of the future? Because you can't get your Malaysia solution through. There is no offshore processing, which is your preferred policy and the opposition's preferred policy. That can't get through the parliament. Onshore processing is what we have. And even though increased numbers, we're just going to see more and more of these people living in the community. Is that what Australians are now accepting and preparing for?
Well, Fran, you're right to say that our position is offshore processing. I think it is the better system. It enables for a more orderly process, would enable us, in my view, to bring more refugees to Australia. Again, the opposition opposes that, but I think we can increase the refugee intake, but you've got to have a fairer and safer way of doing it. So I think we can do that.
But maybe we don't need it. Maybe we just put people into the community as you're already doing.
No, Fran, but when you are going to continue to see people arriving by boat, which means you're going to continue to see deaths at sea, and it's all very well to say, well, let's do all this in the community. When you have deaths at sea, that is an ultimate responsibility. And Fran, I spend time going around refugee camps, and I was talking to refugees in India a couple of weeks ago who wouldn't dream of having the money to pay a people smuggler, and some of them deserve a better chance of resettlement in Western countries, including Australia at the moment. That's what has been driving our approaches to a regional framework, getting proper regional measures in place, which would enable us to have offshore processing, proper offshore processing, which could say to people, if you come to Australia by boat, you're running the risk of being permanently resettled to another country, not Australia. You're not going to get the product you're after. But I will say this, Fran, while we have onshore processing, I do think that, yes, you need to have a suite of measures available. Again, I get criticised for the opposition for, they would say everybody should be in detention. They don't support bridging visas. They say it's a softening of the policy. They demonise the homestay program and make some quite misleading and disgusting comments about that. So they can do that. In the meantime, I think community release is an important part of an onshore processing regime while we have one.
And Minister, just finally on another issue, the drama surrounding Craig Thompson. You're both from the New South Wales right. Did your former colleague do enough, in your view, yesterday to clear his name? What did you make of his statement to the Parliament?
Well, Fran, in terms of clearing your name, there's a very simple approach here. Tony Abbott would have you think that the Parliament is judge and jury for everybody except a member of the Liberal Party. A member of the Liberal Party gets to answer to a court. Mr Thompson, who's now an independent, has to answer to him.
Well, it's not before a court at the moment, it's before the Parliament.
Exactly. Well, no, it's if there are allegations that a court should consider, the court should consider those, not the Parliament. I mean, it's a very important precedent, Fran, which has been respected for a long time, and it's very. I understand that it's easy for political purposes to throw it out the window and say, well, let's appoint the Parliament as the court in this instance. But if you do that once, then you do it for everybody, except the approach being taken by the Liberal parties to say, well, that's what should apply to everybody else. But one of our members gets in trouble, well, they've got to be protected and their innocence has got to be respected, and they should only answer to a court.
So what did you make of Craig Thompson's statement to the Parliament yesterday? Do you believe him?
Well, it's not whether I believe him or not, Fran. It's whether there's an allegation which is taken through the courts, which is important.
Chris Bowen, thanks very much for joining us.
Good on you. Thanks, Fran.
Federal Immigration Minister Chris Bowen. It's 21 past 8.